Welcome to the podcast. My guest today, representing the Crawford, Marion, ADAMH board, is Mr. Brad DeCamp.
Dave, very good to see you.
And thank you. By the way, I should give his proper title. He's the executive director.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for being on here. It's been a little while since you and I've done a podcast.
Been a minute. So very good to see you as always.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But, we don't want to get in trouble here with making jokes. That's never a good thing with that.
No, we have to be careful.
All right, but we do believe in having some fun. And
That's right.
Because we sometimes get into some rather deep topics.
That's true.
And I think probably one of the first ones is something very common this time of year, which I guess you would say has to do with our season, a seasonal affective disorder, correct?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. And seasonal affective disorder is something that people struggle with. And normally around this time of year, one of the things we have to acknowledge is that we just don't have the daylight that we used to. And on the day as such as we're recording it, it's kind of gray outside, and we have a lot of those days during the winter months. And
it's Ohio.
It's Ohio. It's the Great Lakes, and it's what we deal with. But the seasonal affective disorder, one of the things we would want to kind of be aware of is if it's something where you're kind of feeling down for a longer period of time. So if this is something that's going on for more than a couple weeks, if you're noticing like significant changes in energy levels and things like that, that would be something where it might warrant a conversation maybe with your medical professional, or if you have a mental health professional that you're seeing, to mention that to them as well. This is not something that is uncommon or rare. It's not exactly overwhelming, but many people do deal with it. A lot of people can adjust to it with exposure to light. Whether it's light, being in a lighted room, or just being outside. Frequently, it's good to just be outside, get some fresh air, provided that the weather is accommodating, and be able to walk around, get some exercise. And a lot of times that will help with some of those symptoms, but occasionally it will be more severe and require something more intensive.
Major thing you would probably want to say is you just want to be aware of it.
Be aware of it, and try to be as active as you can. And that's challenging for again, if it's rainy, nasty snow outside, it's hard to be out. But again, just if it's a matter of walking outside, whether it's your home or your business, if you can walk outside for a few minutes just to get a little bit of fresh air, and again, that exposure to the light can frequently help too.
Well, it's sort of resetting.
Yes.
Because sometimes we can get very focused on something.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, you come in and you do podcasts and whatever, and I have to reset because sometimes I'm doing like 7 or 8 of these in a row, so I have to reset my mind immediately. Whether I'm ready or not, I have to be ready.
Yeah.
So I understand what you're saying there. So a lot of that you have to kind of sometimes it's just maybe even just taking a breath.
And I agree. And I think your point about recognizing it is really critical, because, if you're recognizing that that's an issue, if you're taking steps to, go outside, maybe get some exercise, but also to really prioritize what are those things that are important to you and what do you enjoy doing.
I think that's a really good point.
Well, you made me think of it, so I'll give you credit for that. But it's really kind of taking a step back and given the time of year that we're recording this, and approximately, it just, I think, requires a little bit of maybe stepping back, planning, thinking about, again, priorities, what are important to you, and thinking, what are those things that kind of give you joy that would, maybe boost your spirits a little bit.
Well, and then too, you run into another situation which sometimes the holiday scene isn't all happy ho 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 for everybody.
You're exactly right, and those were a couple other things that I wanted to touch on. And I think that when we talk about things, whether it's addiction recovery or mental health, I think the key that I would encourage people to think about is again, just taking that step back, thinking about again, what are your priorities? Where do you want to spend your time? How do you want to feel? Like, again, thinking about the holidays. If you're moving into the holidays, how do you want to feel when the holidays are over? And it's kind of easy to not be able to think on that unless you have that clarity. So it's really kind of, to your point, kind of taking that step back, recognizing that there's this issue and that you need to kind of be focused on some of those things.
Well, holidays can be very tough because if you've lost relatives around a holiday, former father-in-law, he died actually on Christmas.
Oh,
I've had people that I've known that or we've had deaths in our family that have been in December, or tend to be over the holiday time. So those hit pretty hard, or there's all kinds of things that can come up during that time. And we tend to be, I don't know how you feel about this, but I've done some as a behavioral counselor. Years ago I did some things in hospital and clinical. I think sometimes we get into a situation where we're looking at something and then we just get focused to the point where we over-focus on it.
The fixation is definitely an issue, and I think you're right, and I think it's the kind of that fine line of, you want to be available to other people. I mean, we talk about, if you have a neighbor or a relative that might be lonely, it's a good time to reach out, because as you pointed out, the holidays aren't always joyful. Everyone at some point in time in their life is going to experience loss. Unfortunately, that's part of the reality. But we try to work with and help people understand that loneliness is really, though, can be a debilitating factor. But it's kind of hard to strike that balance between being so much out there for other people that you don't take time for yourself, and that's very important too.
Well, I think that's a really good point, and another thing I was thinking about too, people that tend to be introverted, extroverted.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe some people have not thought about this. Now, I can give you a personal example of this, because I'm pretty much an extrovert, which most people do not believe that. But to do a program like this is really more like an acting thing for me. But then when I'm out of here, it's like I don't want. It's just like I'm off the stage and I just want to be I'm with my dog and just be quiet.
Yes.
That's me.
Yep.
But people probably never would see me in that role. They have a public persona that you're a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a little different when you're that, because I believe, isn't it pretty much extroverted people are like 25%, 75%? There used to be some kind of numbers that were along outlines, introverts and extroverts, and there's degrees of that too, so you have to kind of watch. But it's a lot of things in the mix, isn't there?
A lot of things in the mix, and I think you just touched on what you would like to do, spending time with your dog, or if you weren't a dog person or a cat person, if you're a cat person, and again having that connection. A lot of times, folks can feel supported just spending that time unplugged with their pets, and it could be other animals as well. But again, just thinking about those. What works for you, and understanding yourself, and recognizing when maybe it's starting to get a little bit much and you need to take a step back.
Yeah, that works for me tremendously. I'm only just giving this as a personal example because I have a mini dachshund, and she likes to come up and sit on my lap, and she normally falls asleep, which I'm not normally very far behind that. But at the point I'm getting at is there's something relaxing and soothing about that, and peaceful.
Yeah.
And that'll already take something and kind of ladder it down from something I can switch very quickly if I'm in that mood, because there's a peace that's there.
Yeah.
You got to find your peace.
You have to find it. It could be reading, could be physical activity, it could be any number of things, or a combination. Yes. It's really, I think, kind of finding that sweet spot between being there for other people, but also recognizing when you need to take time for yourself.
Now, we talked about addictive behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what would fall into that category of addictive behaviors? It's not all just about alcohol and drugs.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it can be spending. It can be things like gambling. So those are some other things that we're kind of keeping an eye on as well. But I think one of the things we also suggest for folks who might have an issue on that side is really thinking about budgets. Sometimes money is a big trigger for people. And so if you're buying for people, buying gifts, it's important to start and recognize, what you are and are not able to do for folks. And so if it's a difference of doing, maybe a $10 gift card as opposed to maybe a $50 gift card, if that's going to, put you over your means and overextend yourself and cause you additional stress, that's something that, we would, just encourage people to be reasonable about and be realistic. And also, not just to yourself, but just to be open and honest with whether it's a friend or family member, to say, look, this is all I can do right now, and being okay with that. Yeah,
I think that's acceptance. It's okay to accept this is the way it is.
Yes,
and there's nothing wrong with somebody saying, hey, this year I can't afford a $50 gift card for you. My situation's changed. Maybe I've lost my job. Maybe my expenses this year are just up due to inflation and whatever. I can't do a 50. Maybe maybe I can do a 10. But
Mm-hmm.
where we get ourselves trapped, and when we're trying to do something that we've done before, when we know deep within us we can't do it, but we're pushing that envelope.
Yeah.
Would you say that's
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of times too, when we talk about kind of the more of the addiction perspective, a lot of times there's guilt and things like that. And I always, when I talk about these things, I joke a little bit about, family members and sometimes, making comments about people, how they look and those types of things. And so there's always this kind of, I think, with more of the addictive disorders, kind of that hook back to the past and not living in the past or being stuck in the past, but try to get to the future. So where I'm going with all that is when you talked about the acceptance, it's really, when you make that statement and you kind of state your bounds, this is where I'm willing to go. How people respond to that is not on you. I mean, that's their reaction. So as long as you're being your authentic self and, being open and honest about what you are and aren't able to do, then how some other person takes that is not on you.
Well, you can only control certain parts of the equation of this
Exactly.
factor.
Right.
And so I can say, okay, I can do it this way. Now, if I take offense that you didn't get me a $50 card,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's on you.
That's
not
exactly
on me.
right. Yep.
And it should not be, I shouldn't feel all depressed because now this year I can only do 25 or 10.
Yep. Nope. Yeah, it's absolutely right. I mean, you've made the effort. You've kind of stated, your position of where you are, and whatever happens is not, that outcome is not on you. You've done what you did. You've kind of made it a priority to get whoever that is something, and so that should stand for something.
Well, at least you thought to try to get them something.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be, the level where it was previously or whatever, but that's really should be kind of an insignificant thing is you try to show I call it affection.
Yeah.
Affection towards others if you're going to give in that way. It doesn't mean you love somebody less or
Exactly.
care less because you got 10 instead of 50.
That's right. That's right.
That's an economics thing.
Yeah, it is. And so it's really important about boundaries and kind of, clearly expressing those and recognizing that how people react is not going to be on you. But, it's also really about, thinking ahead, planning, having that balance like we talked about a few moments ago of when when it's okay to be part of that and what you're comfortable with in terms of being out with people, but then also recognizing when it's time, if that's what helps you to be by yourself, then knowing when to pull back and when it's too much. So
I'll give you another one here that I can relate to this. Sometimes in a day you're very pushed with everything, and everything keeps building up. And sometimes somebody will want to have a discussion about something that you really do not. Now is not the time to have the discussion.
Right.
And I think you know what I'm talking about. It could be any topic.
Mm-hmm.
I normally will say, this is not really a good time for us to have a discussion about this. This is what I'm going through. I'm having this right now. Quite frankly, I don't have the time nor the patience to deal with this at this time. There's nothing wrong with saying
there's nothing wrong with that at all.
That's not being mean. You're just stating, hey, this is where I'm locating myself right now.
Mm-hmm.
And, there you go from there.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect and a good example. And, we also talk about when we're thinking about holiday interactions and things like that, what we tell people who may have a mental health or an addiction or addiction issue is maybe stay away from controversial issues, but again I think kind of stating those boundaries and communicating those clearly, that's part of that discussion too, and then just saying what, we can discuss this at another time, that's perfectly fine. I think that's the way to approach it.
You sort of have to defer some of these things because normally especially if you want to having a discussion about something that's very detailed, and if I'm only speaking for myself, if I'm mentally tired and I really don't, at that time of the day, I don't want to think about it.
Yep.
So I've already shut down this up here already.
Right.
So there's no use really having a discussion on that. And it's nothing against anyone else.
You're right.
It's just know thyself.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's really a lot of what this gets down to is whether you're talking about a mental health issue or an addiction issue. It's really kind of that self-understanding, self-awareness, recognizing, being present in that moment and recognizing when, you've reached that point of, okay, now I'm on overload. I need to take a step back, and whatever that looks like is what it looks like for different individuals. So
I would segue because you made me think of something else.
Oh, yes.
Talking about thinking of different things, this kind of opens up here.
Yeah.
Well, the thought came in and now it kind of left.
That's okay.
But I'm just kind of thinking this as I go through. A lot of times you'll think about certain things, and then sometimes you just need to kind of defer those. You need
Yes.
to take that off. But you have to take that pressure off.
You do, and it's recognizing, again, what some of those things are. I mean, again, a lot of the things that I've mentioned are more general, and
Right.
it may be more specific, though, around maybe issues of grief or loss, like you touched on earlier, or, one of the other things is, that's typically good to avoid is, political talk and things like that, and I would suggest that's generally a good thing to avoid.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it could be other things, though, and going back specifically to one particular issue around addiction, if it is something where you might be engaging with family members who are open to having alcohol at parties, that's perfectly legal and all that. But if that's something that would be a trigger to you, then you need to be thinking about, okay, what am I going to do? Is there someone reliable that I can call on to say, hey, if I get to a point where I need to go, can I count on you to come get me? So it's kind of, again, that whole planning process of thinking about, what's your, plan A, plan B, plan C if something comes up.
Yeah. Well, I think we've discussed quite a few things that kind of come up around the holiday
Yeah.
time, and other times too in this time of year.
Oh, yeah.
And when you get towards the end of the year and the beginning of a new year,
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people flipping the calendar is not going to change a thing.
Right.
It's what actions that you're going to take to change that.
Mhm.
Like you said, you need to be, we talked about a person needs to be aware.
Mm-hmm.
They need to know what their limits are.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lot of things that sometimes we need to think the process through a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we get a little reactive,
Exactly.
and so somebody says something, and then we're kind of get very reactive
Mm-hmm.
about that, and then you get into another spiral of things.
Yeah, and so it's hard because this is typically an emotionally charged time of year for different reasons, and it's a very joyous time of year. I think around this time in terms of like the general excuse me mood, but again, we have the recognition that it's not the same for everybody, and so you kind of have this push and pull of positive and negative, and so it's just there. It's part of the season that we're in. But you're right. I think the end of the year is a lot of time for reflection for many people and thinking about what could you have done differently in the past year and what we'd like to do in the coming year. And I just wanted to mention. Too, recognizing, self-awareness, like you had touched on earlier a couple different times, but also when it's time to reach out. And so we do have, certainly the 988 number is a new number that's out there for folks if they, feel like they're getting to a point where they do need that external help. And so we certainly want to encourage people to call that. And again, just making themselves available to other people, I think a lot of times goes a long way for individuals who are struggling maybe with loneliness and those types of things. But again, I think that's, you touched on the self-awareness, but again, kind of thinking, processing through priorities, boundaries, those types of things, and then knowing when you've reached your point of what to do then.
Right, and that's where you can make some progress in this because, like I say, you get towards the end of the year, and a lot of people, they like to go back to the, quote, yesteryear and the, quote, good old days,
Yeah.
whatever those were.
Yes.
Sometimes, again, we got to come back and put that in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But now is a different time.
Yes.
And say, well, just like I have loved ones, maybe I've lost somebody or lost my loved one. Well, you have to transition out of that at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's good to kind
Not
of
easy, but
yeah.
it can be done.
And if support is important too. There's different groups. I mean, obviously you've got the different anonymous groups that are out there for support and are available at different at all the years or all throughout the year, not just around the holidays or end of the year. But there's also church groups that can be very effective as well, and that whole support of being with other people who have either experienced a loss, if that's what the case might be, or might be dealing with maybe a similar condition. You and I have talked in the past about different issues around chronic medical conditions and how those sometimes
Right.
can be very debilitating to your mental health as well.
Yes.
And so helping kind of find that niche of support too is also very critical.
Yeah, I think, yes, there's very, very many other things too. It's just like people with blood sugar.
Mm-hmm.
People that have blood sugar issues, especially if they have their blood sugars high, some of them get, quite frankly, they get very grumpy.
Very well, and I think there's you and I've talked about this before, that connection between mind and body. And so if you do have those things and you're not balancing those out, they can play off each other.
Well, it's kind of almost sounds like we got two Fraser cranes in here, doing this podcast today. But I have a little knowledge of the background of this sort of thing, and I know you have a very deep background in it. But I just think it was I appreciated today where you took the podcast, because just if somebody comes out of this podcast with one or two things that can help them to move forward, it's probably worth it all.
I appreciate the invite, Dave. As always, it's great talking to you. And certainly folks are welcome to call the ADAMH board at either our Crawford or Marion number, which is 419-562-7288, or the Marion number 740-387-8531. We're glad to talk to people and try to help get them the help that they need.
Awesome. We thank you, Brad DeCamp from the Marion and Crawford ADAMH board.
You got it, buddy.
Got to get that title right. Again, like I said, everybody's titled.
You got it.
And he's the executive director there. I wish you the very best coming in here to the end of the year, the beginning of the year, and always in what's going on.
Same to you.
These are kinds of discussions that need to take place.
I agree.
And people in kind of my age group, a lot of times they wouldn't discuss anything.
Mm-hmm.
But there can be liberty and freedom just in discussing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for the forum, and as always, good to see you.